We all have a story to tell. Let's tell yours. Welcome to the Intellectual People Podcast with your host, Jason. Come together and listen to journey stories and more from interesting people. Welcome your host, Jason.
All right. I want to introduce my first guest, Dr. Earl Geddes of Gedlee. Earl, how are you doing today?
Fine.
Great. So people might know you from Gedlee, but one of the biggest things that people don't know often is how someone got started. So if you would, how did you get into audio?
My brother and I were really into music at a very young age, even before our teens. Beatles, Rolling Stones. I saw the Rolling Stones with Brian Jones. So I naturally, and back at that time, I was singing in his rock and roll band.
Wow.
My brother went on to become a professional bass player and toured the world with a local musician named Earl Geddes. And for a while, I was sound engineer for Earl Geddes as well and did some touring. But I was 12 years old when I built my first stereo, and I assembled the loudspeaker cabinets and put the loudspeakers in. And that was what started it, was just my interest. I was no good at singing and music, but I was very good at the technical side of things. But while I was doing the recording engineer gig, I realized that really wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to sit behind a mixing board and push dials and knobs for the rest of my life. But I was very interested.
Did you find that boring? Did you find that part boring?
I could see it was going to become really boring.
I'm sorry?
I saw that it would become boring.
Okay.
That, while it was interesting and fun while it lasted, it just wasn't intellectually as interesting to me as what I eventually ended up doing. So then I just decided I need to further my education, because I really didn't understand all the stuff that was going on. So so I worked. I got a master's degree in physics, and then worked at Ford Motor Company for a couple of years in their audio group as their chief loudspeaker engineer.
For the automobiles, correct?
For the automobiles.
Okay.
And then I realized that I don't know if I needed, but I certainly wanted to get a more advanced degree. So I went back to Penn State to get my PhD in acoustics again.
Okay. And where did you go from there? You come out, you have a PhD. Where did that lead you?
I went back to Ford.
You went back to Ford.
Right. Okay.
And was it to continue developing automotive audio?
That was part of it, but because when I went back at a higher level, and I was called a technical specialist. Technical specialists were not specific to individual groups; they were specific to particular technologies. And so I did a lot of work in noise control at Ford as well as audio.
So for people listening, noise control of the decibel level inside the vehicle, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Which is much louder, and correct me if I'm wrong, which is much louder than most people actually think it is.
Yeah, well, I don't know where it's at these days. I mean, to me, modern day cars are so quiet, it's amazing. Compared to what we were dealing with back in the 80s, there were tremendous engine noise issues and tire noise issues. And I mean, the tires have improved, the engines have improved, they're balanced, they don't vibrate, they don't tend to send the vibrations in. Noise, they've really cut down on wind noise by modifying gaps and things on the car exterior. I mean, they've come a really long way.
So if you would, give me an example. When you first started, what was the interior decibel level, roughly?
Oh, boy, I can't quite remember it, but it was, I think we measured one time with the window down, it was like 120 decibels.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I was with the window up. I think it was closing in on mid 90s, 100.
Still loud enough for ear damage.
Yeah, but it was all low frequency. I mean, it fell very rapidly. It was a dominant low frequency noise. So low frequencies aren't as damaging as high level high frequency.
Understood. Okay. So you go through Ford, and then what?
Oh, let me see. That's going back some. Well, I went through Ford. I mean, I was at Ford for more than 20 years, so
Wow.
that was the bulk of what I did. But I wanted to work in an industry where acoustics was more central to the product line, whereas noise was important to cars. The car was the product, not acoustics. So I took a job as director of research for Knowles Electronics.
Okay. And what did they do?
They made hearing aid components, mostly the sub-miniature transducers. We called them receivers. They're still called receivers. And the sub-miniature microphones. And Knowles today is the leader in the very small micro machine microphones.
Interesting.
Solid state microphones.
Did you do transducer development there then?
Yeah, transducer development of the very small transducers, which use a different technique than audio transducers.
Interesting. So then how did you get to ultimately, was Gedlee, your company Gedlee, was that the first company that you were involved in home audio, if you will?
I'm trying to think of the timeline. Back when I was at Ford after my PhD, I did a lot of research in waveguides. That was totally unrelated to my work in work at Ford, because I published the waveguide papers in the early 90s.
Wow.
And through the 90s, and I was at Ford at the time.
Sure.
And I needed to create Gedlee to handle some patent issues that were separate from Ford. So I created Gedlee basically as a holding company for my patents, which one of them I had gone on to license to Ford.
Oh, really? I did not know that. And do you mind sharing with us what that was?
That was basically on the use of acoustic levers. Acoustic lever is a it's basically a coupling where you have one diaphragm physically connected to a different size diaphragm.
Okay.
And so they have different, even though if they have the same velocity, they have different volume velocities. So there's things you can do with that. And we did some interesting things. It turned out to be physically large and not practical. So after 3 or 4 years, and we couldn't seem to find an application for it, then Ford let the license go.
Interesting. And how many patents today do you have?
Oh, I think there's like 30.
Incredible. Which one are you most proud of?
God, I don't think I could.
Can't pick one out, huh?
That. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So when you go back to Ford, when was the transition from Ford to Gedlee? When did you say, okay, I really want to get into home acoustics and design and build my own loudspeaker the way I believe they should be done based on all of my knowledge?
Okay, so I had left Ford and gone to Knowles.
Okay.
Then Knowles was sold, and in that transition, they laid me off because they kind of didn't want to put so much money into research. I think they were trying to bolster up the value of the company by eliminating advanced projects, etc., which were a financial drain without an immediate. It made the company look more profitable.
Sure.
And at that time, I went back to Ford. So this is now the 3rd time I've gone back. And I was back at Ford again as a technical specialist. But that time I was also manager of advanced audio.
Okay.
And so I was doing pretty much all audio at that time. But then around 2001, with the dot-com collapse, Ford went through a tough time, and in particular, Visteon, which had been part of Ford but was split off from Ford. They went through a very bad time, and they were laying people off right and left. So they offered buyouts, and I took the buyout, which was a year and a half salary, because I figured that would give me a sufficient capital to establish myself in my own business.
Sure.
And the first thing I did was wrote my book, the first book on audio transducers.
And what's that called?
During writing of that book, I came to some ideas on how to make better loudspeakers, because I was also building home theaters. I'd become quite interested in home theaters. And I found that there weren't really any good home theater loudspeakers. They were mostly too small, or they were professional, giant, big ones. Right. So I designed the Suma, and particularly to use in my own home theater. But I was pretty amazed at the sound quality, how much better they sounded than what I had and anything else that I had heard to that point.
So is it safe to say then the Suma was developed within the first iteration of Suma was built in the first year of your layoff, if you will?
Well, certainly the first couple years.
Okay. And the waveguide, and for people listening that don't know what a waveguide is, can you, in layman's terms, explain what a waveguide is?
Yeah, most people would think of a waveguide as a horn, but when I developed the concept of waveguides, I didn't use the classic Webster's horn equation. I used a physics approach that solved the wave equation directly. Yeah. Because I was using a different approach and came up with different contours, I didn't want to confuse the fact by calling them horns. So I called them waveguides. Excellent. And to my knowledge, I was the first person to use the term acoustic waveguide. Waveguides were used in high frequency transmissions and that sort of thing, but there was no reference to waveguides used in acoustics. And so I figured that would be a good term that would define the difference between a horn and a waveguide. Great. Horns basically are designed with loading in mind, and waveguides are designed with directionality in mind. That's the fundamental difference from my perspective.
Okay. And is a waveguide determined by the depth and the width? Does that mean, other than mathematically, does it need to be a certain depth and or width? No. Okay. No. Okay. So anything can be a waveguide, any depth and width. It just might not work. Is that fair to say?
Right. All horns are waveguides, but not all waveguides are horns.
Understood.
Is that right? Or I said that backwards. No, all waveguides are horns, but not all horns are waveguides. That's the right way to say it.
Okay. So you develop that. The Suma is now your first iteration, right? And where do we go from there? How did Gedlee take off? What was the defining moment of Gedlee really becoming a monetized business that would provide for you and your family?
That happened when I met a friend. There was a guy from Thailand that came and took a class from me.
Okay.
It was a class offered by the ALMA, American Loudspeaker Manufacturers Association, called at that time.
Okay.
And he was quite impressed with my explanations and knowledge of how sound is perceived. The perception of sound came directly from my work in noise control, where I found that the numbers, dB levels, did not reflect in any way people's perception. That I could show you a car whose sound level was lower but sounded worse than a car whose sound level was higher. So the correlation between sound level, which is what everybody was using and all anybody was using, and perception just wasn't there. So I had done several years worth of work in showing how different characteristics of the sound would be perceived differently, even at same signal levels.
Okay.
I actually won the Henry Ford Technological Achievement Award for that, because basically it implemented a whole new way of doing noise control at Ford. And so they awarded me that award.
That's fantastic.
So I took that into the audio realm and was talking about perception in a class, and who became my friend, Kenny Jackal is his name. He still lives in Thailand. He approached me to see if I would be willing to design a line of loudspeakers that he would build in Thailand for use in Asia, because he was a major installer of professional sound equipment.
Okay.
So we started that not correlation, but partnership. Eventually ended up being a partnership.
Okay.
And we started the company called AI, for audio intelligence. At AI, we had created a whole line of loudspeakers, which included a 15-inch, a 12-inch, a 10-inch, and a couple of subwoofers. And we had a factory. We were in the process of ramping up the factory to build hundreds, thousands, whatever we could sell. Wow. That was 2007.
Okay.
Just as we were ready to go full scale, of course, the financial crisis hit. There was no money to be had anywhere.
Wow.
And we had no choice but to shut down, because we just couldn't get any additional financing. Right. And so I came back to the States. I had been living quite a bit in Thailand and doing all the work over there.
Wow.
So I permanently came back to the States and stopped going to Thailand. I had all these designs.
Right.
And they worked great. They were fantastic loudspeakers. So I literally started in my garage making these loudspeakers myself and trying all kinds of different casting techniques, etc. I tried fiberglass, but fiberglass turned out to be very slow and expensive.
Sure, and messy.
And I just, over the years, developed many, many techniques, but all of those designs that I used at Gedlee came out of the work that we had done in Thailand, because I had the designs already. All I needed to do was make them.
Incredible. So, and we're still in 2007. So,
well, yeah, this is more like 2008, 2009.
Now we're 2008, 2009, after the markets collapsed. Okay.
Right.
And you start making, now, did you find that Sumas were the top seller, or?
No, Suma was never the top seller. The big seller was the Abbey. There was a point in time when the waiting list for an Abbey was 6 months to a year.
Yeah. Well, in full disclosure, I was certainly an Abbey customer, and I want to say I waited 3 months or 4 months. And still to this day, I owe an incredible amount of gratitude towards you, because you really opened my ears up to what it should sound like. And still to this day, the Abbeys were just so special, so special. And I want to get into it a little bit later on why you stopped. But so the Abbeys were the big seller. And what was the Abbey? Can you explain? It was a two-way speaker, right, with a waveguide.
Yeah, it had a smaller waveguide than the Suma.
Okay.
And it had a smaller woofer. It was 12-inch woofer and a 12-inch, well, more like 13, 14-inch waveguide.
Okay. And were you primarily selling 2-channel, or were most people doing theater at that time?
Primarily 2-channel.
It was 2-channel. Okay. And where did people add subwoofers?
Yeah, there was a period of time when I was making subwoofers, but I came to discourage that because there were just too many subwoofers on the market that were decent. I couldn't compete financially, so I found that making subwoofers was a financial loss to me, so I just stopped doing it.
Okay, and for those people that know, explain why the multiple subwoofer approach is so critical. And for the people that don't know, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood things in audio still to this day, after all your hard work and explaining why.
My PhD thesis was on the low frequency the low frequency sound field in reverberation chambers, so very reflective environments. One of the things that came out of that was that the shape of the room didn't have much of an effect. It was an effect, but it was fairly minimal. The placement of the source had a much larger effect. And I found that if I could place multiple sources, that the variance of the sound at any one point in the room or across frequency, so basically across the spectrum and around the room, the more sources I had in the simulation, the smoother all this became. Well, it didn't take much to translate that when I came to designing home theaters, to realize that, gee, I could solve some of the boominess in the room by putting a couple more subwoofers around. And so I started playing around with that and found that, yes, absolutely, as everybody that's looked at it has found, the more low frequency sources you use, the less spatial variance and the less frequency variance there is. Now, it never gets flat because the room has modes, but it definitely does improve things.
So are you the person that really came up with that concept?
I think so.
But you don't know for sure, because
I know that Welty at JBL did a paper. He did that, I think, without knowledge of my work.
Okay.
But I had already been doing what he was doing when that paper came out. I wrote that to the AES, and I think the response was, well, if you had done that, it's too bad you didn't publish it. Well, I guess that's true. So I didn't publish proof that I had come up with it first, but I certainly believe I had, because everything that he had written in his paper, I already knew. And I even pointed out a couple of things in his paper that weren't quite correct.
Interesting. And have you guys discussed that?
No, I've never even met Todd.
No? Okay.
No. This co-author, Floyd Toole, and I are old friends, but I've never met Todd.
Okay. So you have Abby's. There are other speakers in the line, correct?
Yeah, there's the Suma, the Abby, and the Nathan.
Okay. And for those listening, what do those names represent?
Oh, and also there's a Harper. Well, Nathan is my son, Abby's my daughter, and Harper's my niece.
Okay, fair enough. And the Suma?
The Suma was just a way to represent what I thought the pinnacle of loudspeaker design was at that point. That's what it meant to me.
Okay. Any of your kids involved in audio currently?
My son just graduated with a double E degree. He, like me, is passionate about music. He's famous, with it. But he's not like me, and I haven't encouraged him to do what I do. One of the reasons is Nathan is a very people person. He just loves to be around people. People love him. I've been more aloof. I prefer to work by myself. Everything I've done pretty much has been by myself.
Right.
I'm just not a big people person, so I'm perfectly content. So he's completely different. And what I found worked for me, I don't think would work for him. So I've encouraged him to look to doing something more people, like management.
Okay.
So he's going to go on and get an MBA.
Okay. And I think it should be pointed out that your speaker designs, while all these other large companies that you would respect, Harman being probably the main one, right?
Mm-hmm.
That their resource is incredible, right?
Okay.
Not only do they have the money, but they have the money and they have management that knows how to use that resource, whether it be people, equipment, facilities. Their resource is incredible. And as someone who has seen it firsthand, it cannot be underestimated, where what you have done individually, solely, is absolutely incredible. And I don't believe that you ever got enough credit for it. right? And I don't know how you feel about it, but I certainly don't believe that you ever got enough credit for it, because I don't think most people really understand what it takes to design a loudspeaker properly, let alone individually, and at the level that you were doing it out. Because so many people today, they call themselves loudspeaker designers, and they crank out a new design every few weeks or months, maybe, where what you have done is you've refined a design over the course of 30 years. Is that correct? Is that accurate?
Maybe not 30 years, but as far as getting proper recognition, that I can't comment to, because I don't know what proper recognition means. I do know this: people grossly underestimate the amount of work it takes to do all of that. Yeah, that there's no doubt about that.
Right. And why did you never pursue working at a company that, such as Harman? I'm not saying Harman specifically, but a company, an audio backed company that had that resource, that wanted to hire you as that chief engineer to really steer the ship and go mainstream, right? A company that could afford to put out all of the money for funding and take, whether it be your design of Gedlee or another design that obviously incorporates your knowledge. Why did you never go that route?
Well, it was close many times. I interviewed Electro Voice back in probably 75.
Wow.
And they offered me a job. Unfortunately, I'd been working for Ford, and their pay scale was, I'm sorry to say, it was just not competitive. I mean, I would have had to take a huge cut in pay to have done that. And having just started a family, that would have been that was a difficult choice to make.
Sure.
I really wanted the job.
You did.
I just couldn't see taking a large pay cut to do it.
And was it going to be for their pro towers, if you will, for live audio? Is that what that would have been?
It would have been, they didn't separate out things like that. It would have been head of research, yeah.
Okay. Any regrets in not taking that, looking back?
Oh boy,
I know it's hard to go back, but
yeah, it's too hard to go back. Yeah, I would love to have taken the job. I think I could have done a lot at Electro Voice. I think I could have helped them. My career could have been totally different, but
sure.
I don't know how you.
I understand
things like that. Yeah. I always like to quote the classic line from Saturday Night Live, where what would Spartacus do if he had a Piper Cub? You ever see that?
Yep.
That's a classic.
Yep. So you have a 6-month, 9-month lead time for Abby's, your most popular loudspeaker.
Mm-hmm.
What was the toughest part of Gedlee?
The toughest part for me, you mean physically manufacturing?
Yeah, well, not manufacturing, but running a business that you were primarily the one man doing accounts receivable, accounts payable, design, development, and actual hands-on of building and packing the speakers. So what was the hardest part for you that you found? Because the design, I would imagine, was probably at a certain point the easier part for you, right? But running of the business, right, it becomes hard, and you're dealing with people, right?
Well, running the business isn't too hard when you're a sole proprietor. The accounts receivable, I could only make a couple of speakers a week. Yep. So it wasn't as if the volume was huge. Of course, my markups and my profit margins were very high, so I was making decent money.
Okay.
But the volumes weren't that great ever. So the hardest thing I found was shipping. What a pain in the ass that was, because there's no amount of damage that a shipper can do. I mean, it amazed me sometimes when the speakers would come back. They'd look like somebody dropped them out of an airplane.
Incredible.
I mean, how does that happen? Right. So it just became ever tougher and tougher to figure out ways to package them so that they wouldn't get destroyed en route.
Right.
That was part of the problem. The second most difficult thing I found was paint. Wow.
Really?
That was difficult. Yeah.
And paint from what was acceptable to you, or the issue was the consumer not being happy with the finish?
It was both. They weren't happy and I wasn't happy, but the more, that was something that I had never really done before. I didn't understand. I didn't really have facilities to do it. I didn't have a clean room, so dust was always a problem.
Right.
It takes a lot of expertise and some very specialized equipment. Towards the end, I did get very good at it.
You did? Did you enjoy that part, or you?
No, I always hated that.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, I mean the materials were stinky, and cleanup was a mess. No, I hated that.
And you never wanted to sub that out?
I tried. I went to a couple of car places to see if they would paint them, and a couple guys said yeah, but then they never got around to it. And it just, again, I probably should have tried harder and kept going, but just didn't work out when I tried it.
Right. So what led then? Did you ever develop any more of the Abbey? Did you ever take it from your basic design? And I say basic, not to minimize the design, but did you ever develop the Abbey into something more than from when you were in Thailand and you had that design? Did you ever develop it even more so?
Well, it was continuously improved, but at the very end of my making speakers, I did do a what I called an NA12, which is a new Abbey 12. In that one, I had redone the waveguide. I'd used the waveguide from the Suma and the woofer from the Abbey, and
interesting.
Basically, that was a smaller speaker that the NA12 performed pretty much the same as the Suma.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
But then I also did an NS15, which was a new Suma, and that outperformed the NA12, but all of them were better than the early ones.
Okay. And they were all still passive designs, or did you go?
Yeah. Well, I offered them either active or passive. Either way, I could do them both. And in fact, my own speakers are active, although I don't find active to be of enough benefit to compensate for its hassle.
But do you find any objective benefit at all?
Objective benefits are hard to quantify. I'll tell you this, I can't find very much. Well, you said objective, yeah. So I did find objective benefits to the active, but they were small, and they were very small, in fact. Because if I kept refining the passive, I could get it pretty close to the active.
Interesting.
It's a lot easier to implement, that's for sure.
Do you believe, Earl, that the companies that will say that active has more benefit than a passive, that part of what they're missing is lack of knowledge for passive design?
I would say so, yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
That's very interesting.
Look at people like a classic example is Tom Danley. I mean, he does all passive designs. His crossover are incredibly complex.
Are they?
They work very well.
Interesting.
There's a lot of advantages to passive. You only need one amplifier. That's, to me, the big advantage, because I wanted a home theater system, and to do active, you can't really use receivers because they don't split the channels properly. So I literally had to come out of the receiver into a resistor and then take the signal off of that into a separate amplifier to make it, to have it go passive, to have it go active.
Right.
All of that ended up being incredibly complex, and in the end was just marginally different. Even if I couldn't say for sure it was better.
Interesting. Very interesting. So you continue building speakers, and at what year did you decide I'm done? I'm going to retire.
Well, there was never a fixed time. Sales just dwindled away to the point where it really wasn't worth it to me to keep the manufacturing facilities up. I wanted to use that space for something else.
And what is that something else?
Stained glass.
Stained glass.
Yeah.
So that's what you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is that a hobby that you had at one time that you gave up to build speakers, or?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been doing stained glass for 50 years.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't do small pieces. I do massive, major. The one I'm working on now is taking me 2 years.
How large is it?
It's a reproduction of a Tiffany 18-inch wisteria. 2,400 pieces of glass, cast bronze base. The top is cast bronze.
That's incredible. And is that people are contracting you to do this, or is this just?
No, I've sold a few, but basically I just like doing it.
It's really just a hobby.
It's a hobby, yeah.
That's amazing. Interesting. And are you self-taught on that? How did you get into?
Yeah, absolutely. Never took a class in my life.
Never took a class. Interesting. So are you involved in acoustics at all anymore?
The only thing I do anymore is go to DIY audio. There's some interesting discussions there that I get involved in.
Okay.
But out of that, no, I don't. Well, occasionally a client will come along that has a project that's really interesting. Like a client came along about 6 months ago that wanted me to design an all-new compression driver. That interested me, so I did that.
Okay, and you did it. It's finished.
They haven't yet manufactured a prototype, but yeah, the design is finished.
And will you do the testing for once the prototype is built?
I'm not sure.
Okay, are you willing to do that much development? Or do you not want to be even that busy with that?
Well, in this case, I would, yeah. I would do it.
And is that compression driver for mainstream, or is it professional application?
Not even for audio, and because of its client, I can't disclose what.
Understood. Totally understand and respect that. Interesting. So where do you go from here? What at some point is Nathan, do you think, going to get involved in the audio business? Do you think he'll get the bug and want to take all of your knowledge and create the next?
That's really hard to say. I don't know. This last summer was real disappointing for him because he had a job working at Harman. And I think he would have gotten hooked had he gone through with that, but they pulled the offer after COVID.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, that is too bad, because that could have been a game changer there. Yeah,
that would have absolutely. That you don't believe that will come up again, or has he?
Well, who knows? He's had to make a decision about what to do. Otherwise, he applied to every audio company in the United States, and there was just nothing. So, and I told him that's what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to graduate and you're going to find absolutely nothing. And your only chance is to go back to school and wait this out, and such that when you come out of school, you'll be better equipped to get a better job.
Or prepared. Yep. Interesting. So has he applied to Gedlee yet? Because I'm pretty sure he could work there.
Yeah, he could work there. Well, remember, I can't make speakers anymore because the workshop is now all turned into a stained glass shop. That's
incredible. It's such a large transition. It's almost hard for me to wrap my head around how you go from almost an objective world to a subjective world, right? I mean, in essence.
I've always been a fan of art. I mean, I'm just, my house is filled with original paintings and sculptures and a lot of my own work, in fact.
Interesting.
Stained glass all over the place. If you want to see some of my stained glass, not the latest pieces, but my website has a section called glass.
Does it? Okay.
It shows my work. Yeah.
So, and that's Gedlee, GEDLEE.com, correct?
Right.
Okay. And there's also, correct me if I'm wrong, Earl, lots of white papers that you've written over the years. There are links to white papers there so people
Yeah.
can read about the multiple sub approach and about waveguides, correct?
Yeah, I kept the website up even after I retired just because of the information content.
And do you plan on sustaining that as well indefinitely?
Oh, sustaining it? Yeah, I don't see any reason why not to. And for me to shut down the website at this point would be a major problem because I use it for my email, I use it for everything. So I have to maintain the website to maintain all my other access.
See that? We're not letting you go so easily. We're going to keep you
Right.
we're going to keep you attached to Gedlee.com no matter what.
I
All
thought
right.
there's a couple of things I'd like to write a paper about.
Really?
Yeah.
And in the audio realm.
Yeah. Yeah, one has to do with the fact that people do room acoustic modeling using rectangular rooms, and they use equations that really aren't correct for what they're trying to do. Basically, in a real room, virtually all the damping occurs at the walls. But in the simplified equations for room modes, they assume that the damping is uniform, which means it happens throughout the space. Well, that's highly erroneous, especially for a highly damped room. Well, most good listening rooms should be highly damped at low frequencies. So I wanted to write a paper showing the difference between the correct solution using a highly damped walls versus the lesser correct. The two will be the same if the room is lightly damped.
Okay.
But the two will diverge dramatically as the room becomes more and more damped. And so I wanted to show that. I would like to show that. But right now I'm having trouble with my development studio because I change computers and I can't get things to work. So if I get them to work, which I'm sure will eventually happen.
Well, I'm sure we would all love to read your writings. That's for sure.
Okay.
And we would love to read your writings. I know I would for sure. And I'm sure others would too. As you mentioned before, Dr. Floyd Toole has written 2 books, right? Two main books.
I've only seen the one. I thought I thought the second one was just a revision of the first one, but
is it okay? So
I don't know. I don't know anything about the second book. I've not seen it.
And no interest in writing a book such as that?
Well, audio transducers was similar to that, a little more technical. No, I think what Floyd is good at, he's very good at and far better than I am. And I think what I'm good at, I'm very good at and far better than he is. So I think we're best off not trying to overlap each other's subjects.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And what if you could give advice to somebody that has an audio system, whether it's inexpensive or very expensive, what do you think the one thing is that most people need to do that they don't do to get better sound?
Spend the vast majority of your money on your loudspeakers because the electronics don't make any difference.
Okay. And then the follow-up to that is, how much of a room, being that you mentioned room acoustics, if they spend all of their money on the speaker, the loudspeaker, what about the room, and why would you pick the speaker and not the room?
Most people aren't willing to change the room, so that doesn't come up very often. It's very rare you'll find somebody that's willing to do something radical to the room to improve it. So I found that basically the room is a given.
Okay.
I have never had anybody ask me much. No, I wouldn't say never, but it's a rare occurrence for somebody to ask me to help them design room acoustics. Mostly they don't want to change the room. Loudspeaker, that's a different factor. And honestly, I think almost any room will work well if you use good loudspeakers and multiple subs.
Okay. So there's a lesson here, right? Is that if you use a proper loudspeaker, constant directivity loudspeaker, in any room, any average size home environment with multiple subwoofers, you'll get excellent sound compared to a mediocre design in that same room. Is that
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I designed my listening room specifically for listening, and it does improve it. But I've heard the same speakers in other rooms, and the improvement from the room is far, far less than the improvement from the loudspeakers.
really? Is that?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I would not have thought that. Interesting. Would you say that an optimized room an optimized room gets you to 100%, but an average room is 85% of that optimized room?
Yeah,
Or
85 to 90%.
it is that high? Interesting.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I would say the contributing factors would, in my opinion, would be electronics is 5 to 10%.
Okay.
The room is 10 to 15, maybe 20 in some cases if the room is bad. The rest of that's going to be the loudspeakers. I mean, they're by far and away the dominant factor in audio reproduction.
So everybody should put in the most amount of money that they can to properly design loudspeakers.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And without going into brands that you would recommend at this point, with Gedlee not operational, and I'm assuming that Gedlee, if somebody wanted a Gedlee speaker, that is not possible at this time.
It could be possible. There's a guy in Indiana that is trying to make them, but he hasn't been successful yet. So I can't as yet say that I could transfer an order to him. But that may happen in the future.
Why? What is his struggle in manufacturing them?
I think his struggle is his commitment.
Okay, so not a technical struggle, or
yeah, it's a nice idea, but he underestimated the amount of work, just
really?
like everybody else does.
Is he in the audio business now?
Yeah, he is.
He's in audio, and he did not realize how much work your design actually takes.
He's in a different part of audio. He has a business making vinyl records.
Wow, that's quite different.
That's quite different, yeah.
So he heard a Gedlee speaker, I presume, and fell in love with it?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. And then he owns my old set.
Well, I really, really hope that he figures it out, because I do believe that there's still a massive need in the audio community for proper designs. Unfortunately, as you are well aware of, in the audio world, there is an incredible amount of mediocre at best loudspeakers, right?
No kidding.
And I would love to see nothing more than Gedlee come back, even under someone else's banner, but those original designs or new and improved designs be mainstream and be available for people to hear and listen, and maybe even take it to another level of finish, right? Because unfortunately, no matter how we cut it, speakers become art in someone's house, and people want pretty speakers, right? I am very different, where I have a dedicated room. I don't care if they look utilitarian. I just want the best sound, because quite frankly, when the lights are off and my eyes are closed, I
Right.
can't look at them, right? So, but not many people are like that. And certainly significant others are not like that as well, because it
Mhm.
really does become a piece of furniture in someone's house. So if somebody was out there that could do veneer and make them pretty in that regard, that would just be fantastic. And matching subwoofers, of course.
Mhm.
Really, it would be fantastic. And I gotta say, I know that I mentioned this. It would be incredible to see Nathan take over the business and come out with an Earl, as I would call it, which is a full range. Call it a Suma, call it an Abbey, but it would be called the Earl, and it would be a full range speaker for the people that don't want to add subwoofers, even though they should, but they can start out with a full range speaker and then over time grow their system to have multiple subwoofers, as they should, in my opinion, and certainly yours, and continue what you and we can't end this conversation without mentioning your wife, right? Who did have a part in Acoustics, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to help you, right, in the acoustics side of how we hear. Is that correct?
Right. She and I wrote a number of papers on perception.
Right.
And she's instrumental in that because she has the psychoacoustic testing background. She had the ability to do the psychoacoustic tests. She knows how to analyze the data.
Right.
Those are things I just had never done. So she's been instrumental in that regard.
So she's the Lee in Gedlee. So it's Geddes
Right.
and Lydia Lee. So Earl Geddes, Lydia Lee, Gedlee is the company. And it would be really, really wonderful if Nathan took it over. And I guess I'll continue to wait and cross my fingers that he will certainly start asking lots of questions and learn from you while he can, right? Before life gets too busy.
Well, I'm sure he'll watch this once it's produced.
I would love it. And if he or anybody else would like to join in, I'd love to have them on. And thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
And once again, thank you so much for your efforts and what you've given any audiophile or any music lover that has ever heard your speakers. They are truly special. And I truly thank you for what you've given me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to mention one thing.
Please.
There's a phenomenal amount. There's some phenomenal work going on at DIY. There's a guy named Marcel who has created software that will analyze waveguides, stuff I could never have done back when I was doing it. And he has shown dramatic improvements in the waveguides that I was using. So yeah, if I were to build another speaker, I would definitely use his designs or some of his designs because they really are head and shoulders better than what we've seen in the past. And I'd encourage anybody that has interest in the subject to go to that website, to go to DIY Audio and find the acoustic waveguide, or I don't remember the name of the thread, but the information in that thread is state of the art. It's beyond anything that I see being done by any of the professional companies.
Wow.
And he did all this himself. So it's a pretty amazing piece of work.
And I have to ask, so for anyone that's interested, it's www.diyaudio.com, diyaudio.com, just so people can get there. What is his profession? What does he do? Honestly,
I don't know, but his programming skills are immense. So I'm thinking he must be a programmer or something. He lived in Prague, Czechoslovakia, so my chance of meeting him or getting, to work closely with him is just not possible. Well, like all of us work now, we can do it virtually, Earl. Yeah, true.
All of these platforms are truly incredible, and daily we do it. So I'm sure if you and he wanted to get together and discuss to develop it, heck, I'll even moderate it.
We discuss this all the time. I mean, this is a daily thing. There's several very sharp people that go to that site, and the topics that we're discussing are state of the art. Yep. Like, how high should the directivity index be? Should it be flat, slightly upward? Should the on-axis pressure be slightly falling or flat? I mean, these are very intricate. Sure. In the old days, nobody even looked at polar response in DI. It just didn't even exist. And now we're talking about what's the optimum of those features that people have ignored for decades.
Absolutely. Yep. And it's incredible how many companies still haven't caught on to it. That's what's incredible. And
Well,
how many?
very few. There's only a handful of companies who still care much about DI. I mean, Harman being one of them, of course.
Sure.
The
And I
big
don't know.
there.
I don't know if you see behind me what it is, but that's an M2. That's a
Oh,
JBL
okay.
M2 actually, right there.
I can't see over there.
Yeah.
Cut
Sorry.
off.
Yeah, it's interesting, and hopefully, keep saying hopefully, but it's so important for certainly the younger generations to push forward, right? And learn from people such as yourself, because there's so much knowledge there. And we see this in other industries, one being certainly aerospace, right? Where the people that have pioneered and have done it the old fashioned way without computers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now the new generation is all about computers, which is great. However, it's so important to learn from the people that have so much knowledge pre-computers, because there's knowing the why and the how is really important, rather than letting that computer do all the work for you, right? And you're just inputting.
Right. Well, garbage in, garbage out.
Correct.
You have to. Computers are great if you know what you're looking for, but they're not much help if you don't.
Right. And like you mentioned, you developed that waveguide the old-fashioned way, right?
Yeah, there were no. Well, there were some computers involved in the calculations, but basically that's because the hand calculations were just too difficult.
Correct. Right. And that is really rare, because this new gentleman on DIYaudio.com is probably 100% calculated.
Yeah, it's 100% numerical, whereas mine were numerical solutions of basically, I would hate to say the use of the word, but analog solutions. They were not digitally. You didn't digitize the field and digitize it and simulate the wave motion. Yeah, it's all done very differently today.
And I have to ask, since we're still on the topic of waveguides, because it is probably it's certainly the part of your loudspeaker that made it what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a foam plug. There is a foam plug that's part of your loudspeaker.
Right.
And I want to ask, how did that come about? Why did it come about? And the other part is, do you believe that it would still be necessary if you were to develop that waveguide using this gentleman's technique? Do you believe that that would always be of benefit? And why haven't we seen it in others?
I don't know why we haven't seen it. That makes no sense to me. And I do believe that it's always a benefit. And
Okay.
I believe that people who've experimented with it have found it to always be a benefit. There have been many people who've claimed to experiment with it, but when I queried them on it, they were using all the wrong foam. Well, of course, you put the wrong foam in there, it's terrible.
Right.
But I have not found a waveguide that the foam doesn't make sound better. It seems to take out a harshness that's present when it's not there.
And would a manufacturer have to license that through you because that is patented?
That was patented, but I believe that patent has expired because I'm not making them anymore. So I couldn't even enforce a patent. If you're not making the thing you've patented, you can't enforce the patent, right? You have to be making it. So there was no point in paying the fee if I wasn't going to even attempt to enforce it.
Understood. And so you would be open to working with other manufacturers if they wanted to incorporate that into helping them maybe incorporate that with the proper foam, the proper size foam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be fine.
That's excellent. That is excellent. I've always wondered myself why nobody did it. I can only say from my own ears what I thought, and obviously the measurements don't lie. So it's interesting that nobody has done it, and I was unaware that people could do it, which is really interesting that they can do it, and you haven't gotten an inquiry, or more important, we haven't seen it by a large manufacturer that really knows what they're doing.
What people will often do is they'll just take foam and put it in the waveguide and not compensate for it. You've got to compensate for it.
And when you say compensate, do you compensate in the waveguide design, or just the sound level needs to be increased?
Yeah, mostly the sound level. You have to compensate for it in the crossover. So either actively or passively.
Okay. And is it usually a few dB, or is it even more?
Yeah, there's a few dB.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. And is it an incremental difference when you measure it, or is it incredible difference?
Incremental.
It is. Okay.
Yeah, it's the icing on the cake. If you take the foam out of it and redo the crossover, the speaker's still going to sound basically the same, but there might be a slight harshness to the sound because there's a little more ringing, basically. Horns want to ring. There's a reflection from the mouth, so they want to ring, and the foam dampens that tremendously. It does a really good job of dampening the ringing.
Okay. Well, do you miss not being in the thick of it, of designing? I mean,
well, sure.
You
sure.
do. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess I can relate to that in my previous career. So I understand it, and I left it for my own reasons. I still miss the technical side of it, though, right? I don't miss everything else that goes along with it.
Right.
But I miss the technical side and the actual product. So I can relate to that. And it's sometimes hard to walk away. So ultimately, why did you walk away? Business was down and you said,
business was down. So I didn't want to keep on the technical side. I never really did walk away. Right. So,
sure.
I mean, I've kept various clients on and off for even the last few years. And like you say, I took a client just 6 months ago, but these were all because they were technical challenges that I wanted to do. I didn't do any of the grunt work at all in any of them. So I got to do what I wanted to like to do, and I didn't have to do what I don't like to do. So that's the way I like to work.
I get that. Well, Earl, thank you so much again for your time. I really do appreciate it. And hopefully we see some more out of you. And for everybody else, go to DIYaudio.com if you want to read more from Earl. And certainly, can you mention that gentleman's name again as well?
His name's Marcel. He goes by the it's M-A-Bak. He started the thread.
Okay. And maybe I'll post a link to that thread.
That would be great.
Is what I'll do. I'll include that link to this episode, and so people can go see him for the technical people that want to learn more about it for sure. Until then, thank you again.
Sure.
And have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Find us on YouTube and Facebook at The Intellectual People Podcast and online at theintellectualpeoplepodcast.com. Check back for exciting new episodes.